You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, enacted in 1978, provides the statutory foundation for U.S. national security surveillance operations. It established a specialized judicial body known as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or FISC, to review government applications for surveillance orders. These proceedings are ex parte, meaning only the government presents arguments, reflecting the sensitive and classified nature of intelligence investigations. Critics argue that the absence of adversarial representation limits judicial scrutiny, though in recent years amici have occasionally been appointed to provide independent perspectives. For learners, FISA's structure demonstrates how national security priorities shape due process differently than in criminal contexts. The law attempts to balance secrecy needed for intelligence work with the oversight function of the judiciary, ensuring that surveillance requests are not entirely unchecked, even as they operate in a classified environment shielded from public view. Under FISA, the government may seek orders for both electronic surveillance and physical searches when targeting foreign powers or their agents within the United States. Electronic surveillance can include wiretaps of phone lines, monitoring of internet communications, or installation of technical devices on networks. Physical search authorities allow entry into residences, offices, or storage facilities to collect documents or install monitoring tools. These powers are limited to situations involving national security threats, and investigators must demonstrate probable cause that the target is an agent of a foreign power. For learners, this requirement underscores how FISA overlays constitutional standards with national security considerations. Unlike ordinary warrants, FISA orders focus less on criminal conduct and more on intelligence relevance, reflecting the unique objectives of counterintelligence and counterterrorism. One of the most debated provisions under FISA was Section 215, often called the Business Records Authority. It allowed the government to compel production of tangible things, including financial, telecommunication, or business records, relevant to an investigation. For many years, this section was the basis for bulk telephony metadata collection programs that drew widespread criticism after the Snowden disclosures. Subsequent reforms under the USA Freedom Act restricted its use, mandating more targeted queries. For learners, this history illustrates how surveillance authorities evolve under pressure from public opinion, judicial review, and political oversight. Section 215 exemplifies how laws written for specific investigative needs can expand dramatically in application, prompting later recalibration when privacy concerns become too significant to ignore. FISA also introduced the concept of roving wiretaps, which allows surveillance orders to follow a target rather than being tied to a single device. This tool is critical when suspects use multiple phones, internet accounts, or communication facilities to evade detection. Investigators may update identifiers dynamically, ensuring coverage continues even as devices change. For learners, roving authority illustrates how law adapts to modern mobility and technology. It balances investigative continuity with oversight by requiring probable cause and court approval, even as the form of communication evolves. Without roving authority, surveillance could be perpetually outdated, missing critical intelligence simply because a target switched phones or SIM cards. In addition to full content intercepts, FISA authorizes pen register and trap and trace devices. These tools capture dialing, routing, and signaling information, but not the content of communications. For example, they may show what numbers were dialed, what websites were contacted, or how data packets were routed. Because these records reveal patterns of communication without capturing substantive conversations, the legal threshold for approval is lower. For learners, this highlights the ongoing debate about metadata. While often treated as less sensitive, patterns of contact can reveal associations, habits, and networks of affiliation, making metadata nearly as revealing as content in some contexts. FISA acknowledges this distinction but also sparks questions about whether traditional lines between metadata and content still make sense in today's data-rich world. Minimization procedures are a core safeguard within FISA orders. They are designed to limit the retention and dissemination of information about U.S. persons that is incidentally collected. These procedures outline when such data must be destroyed, when it can be shared, and how it can be masked in reports. For learners, minimization embodies the principle of proportionality. Intelligence collection may sweep broadly, but the use of that information must be narrowly tailored. Minimization rules are not only policy choices but statutory requirements, reflecting Congress's intent to balance intelligence needs with constitutional privacy protections. The effectiveness of these safeguards is frequently debated, but they remain a cornerstone of compliance under national security surveillance law. The Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence play key roles in certifying and overseeing FISA programs. Their responsibilities include approving targeting procedures, ensuring minimization standards are followed, and reporting compliance to the FISC and to congressional committees. This executive oversight functions alongside judicial and legislative checks, creating a multi-branch framework of accountability. For learners, this reflects how privacy governance in intelligence is distributed across institutions rather than concentrated in one. Each branch plays a role, though critics argue that executive dominance and classification constraints weaken the balance. Still, the framework demonstrates how national security surveillance requires layers of approval, not unilateral action. National Security Letters, or NSLs, are another surveillance tool often associated with FISA contexts. These administrative subpoenas allow agencies such as the FBI to demand records like subscriber information, billing data, or transaction logs from service providers without prior judicial approval. NSLs frequently include non-disclosure or gag orders, preventing providers from informing affected customers. For learners, NSLs reveal the tension between efficiency and oversight. They enable rapid collection of critical information, but the secrecy and lack of judicial involvement have raised constitutional challenges. Providers receiving NSLs must establish protocols for compliance while maintaining accountability internally, recognizing that secrecy obligations create significant governance burdens. FISA also permits emergency surveillance under expedited authority. In cases of imminent threats, the Attorney General can authorize surveillance before court approval, provided that an application is submitted promptly afterward, typically within 7 days. This allows investigators to act quickly when waiting for formal orders could endanger national security. For learners, emergency authority illustrates how surveillance frameworks must be flexible to address real-world risks. The safeguard is the requirement of retroactive judicial review, ensuring that emergency powers are not abused. This provision reinforces the principle that privacy protections may bend in urgent moments but must be restored through oversight once the immediate danger has passed. For private sector providers, compliance with FISA orders involves strict duties of verification and scope control. Providers must ensure that orders are valid, apply only to the specified accounts or selectors, and are implemented in ways that respect minimization requirements. They may challenge orders they believe are unlawful or overbroad, though such challenges are often conducted under seal. For learners, this highlights the role of providers as intermediaries in privacy governance. They serve as both conduits for lawful surveillance and as protectors of their users' rights, often navigating complex classified processes. This dual role underscores how trust in digital platforms depends not only on technical security, but also on how companies handle legal demands for sensitive information. Segregation of national security disclosures from other legal processes is a best practice for providers. National security requests are handled in compartmentalized workflows, with limited access and specialized staff trained in classified handling. This ensures that FISA compliance does not bleed into routine legal process responses, protecting against mistakes or over-disclosure. For learners, this practice reflects the principle of compartmentalization. Just as militaries classify and silo information to minimize exposure, companies must segregate national security responses to preserve privacy and operational integrity. It highlights the need for organizational structures that recognize the heightened stakes of intelligence-related compliance. Transparency reporting has become one of the few ways companies can shed light on their FISA obligations. While gag orders often prevent disclosure of specifics, providers may publish aggregate statistics or ranges of requests received, offering the public a glimpse into the scale of surveillance. For learners, transparency reporting illustrates how even secrecy-laden systems can accommodate limited accountability. These reports empower public debate, allowing citizens to understand the trade-offs being made in their name. Though constrained, transparency is a critical bridge between classified operations and democratic oversight, showing how companies can maintain credibility while respecting legal secrecy. Handling classified requests also requires robust security controls, including data access restrictions, encryption, and audit trails. Providers must ensure that only authorized staff with clearances can process FISA orders and that every action is logged for accountability. Audit trails serve both evidentiary integrity and compliance review, providing records for internal and external oversight. For learners, these technical safeguards mirror principles from cybersecurity and data governance. They demonstrate that privacy in national security contexts is not protected by law alone, but also by rigorous operational security. Trust depends on demonstrating that classified processes are not only legally justified, but also technically controlled to prevent misuse or overreach. Finally, training and need-to-know restrictions are vital for managing sensitive disclosures under FISA. Only select personnel should be authorized to handle orders, and they must receive training on statutory obligations, minimization requirements, and incident response procedures. Organizations must also plan for errors, ensuring that misrouted or overbroad disclosures are detected, corrected, and documented. For learners, this highlights how privacy governance is embedded in human processes as much as in law or technology. Training ensures that staff understand both the gravity and the limitations of their role, reinforcing a culture of compliance where national security obligations are executed with respect for individual rights and institutional integrity. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Section 702 of FISA, enacted in 2008, created one of the most important and controversial authorities in the U.S. national security surveillance framework. It allows the government to compel electronic communications service providers to assist in the collection of foreign intelligence information targeting non-U.S. persons reasonably believed to be outside the United States. Unlike traditional FISA, 702 does not require individualized warrants for each target. Instead, the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence certify broad categories of intelligence needs, subject to FISA court approval of targeting and minimization procedures. For learners, Section 702 represents a structural shift. It moves from case-by-case warrants toward programmatic oversight, reflecting the scale and complexity of global communications. The authority attempts to balance intelligence collection with privacy rights, but its breadth has fueled ongoing debate about incidental collection of Americans' communications. The targeting framework under Section 702 is built around strict prohibitions on intentional collection of U.S. persons' communications. Agencies must follow documented targeting procedures that require analysts to demonstrate a reasonable belief that the selector, such as an email address or phone number, belongs to a non-U.S. person located abroad. Reverse targeting using foreign selectors as a pretext to gather information on U.S. persons is expressly forbidden. For learners, this prohibition illustrates how legal safeguards attempt to operationalize privacy principles in intelligence settings. Targeting decisions must be documented and subject to review, reflecting the idea that even in national security contexts, surveillance must be bounded by rules that constrain scope and purpose. Two main modalities of Section 702 collection are often described: provider-directed acquisition and so-called upstream or backbone collection. Provider-directed acquisition requires communication providers like email or cloud services to deliver communications associated with approved selectors. Backbone collection, on the other hand, involves acquiring communications as they transit Internet backbone switches controlled by U.S. companies. For learners, these modalities illustrate the technical breadth of 702 authorities. Provider-directed acquisition is relatively discrete, while upstream collection sweeps more broadly and increases the likelihood of incidental capture. Understanding the modalities helps explain why debates about overcollection and minimization remain so central to oversight discussions around Section 702. Querying procedures govern how data collected under 702 can later be searched. Agencies may run queries against the 702 database using identifiers associated with U.S. persons, but such queries require additional approvals and documentation. Courts and oversight bodies have demanded more stringent safeguards for these U.S. person queries to prevent 702 from becoming a backdoor search tool for domestic surveillance. For learners, querying procedures highlight the distinction between acquisition and use. Even if incidental collection occurs, rules around querying, access, and dissemination control how data is ultimately applied. This illustrates the broader privacy principle that control mechanisms must exist at every stage of the data lifecycle, not just at the moment of initial collection. Minimization and querying safeguards play a crucial role in Section 702 operations. Agencies must mask or redact U.S. person identifiers unless dissemination is necessary for foreign intelligence or evidence of crime. Dissemination rules require detailed justifications, and audit trails ensure accountability. For learners, these safeguards represent the privacy counterweight to expansive collection. They embody the idea that while collection may be broad, usage must be disciplined, tightly monitored, and justifiable. Minimization transforms abstract legal promises into operational practices, helping preserve constitutional values even in classified intelligence environments where traditional notice and challenge rights are absent. Retention policies for Section 702 data define how long communications may be stored, often 5 years for most data but shorter for certain categories. Purge triggers require deletion of data that is determined to be non-pertinent, improperly collected, or associated with U.S. persons without justification. Compliance incidents, such as improper queries or misapplied targeting procedures, trigger reporting, remediation, and sometimes court-ordered reforms. For learners, these mechanisms illustrate how surveillance governance depends on lifecycle management. Retention is not indefinite. Instead, policies mandate destruction once the utility of the data diminishes. This reflects a recognition that the risks of storage grow over time, and that minimizing exposure requires deliberate deletion protocols. Corporate assistance is central to Section 702 compliance. Providers served with orders must establish secure channels for delivering communications in specified formats. Assistance often involves technical mediation platforms designed to segregate and transfer only the targeted data. Providers must also protect against insider abuse, ensuring that only vetted staff handle classified tasks. For learners, this underscores the role of private companies as frontline implementers of surveillance law. They serve both as conduits for intelligence collection and as custodians of user trust. Their cooperation is compelled by law, but how they execute that cooperation through secure delivery, scope minimization, and internal controls shapes the balance between lawful access and privacy protection. Oversight of Section 702 is multi-layered. The FISA court reviews and approves targeting and minimization procedures annually. The Department of Justice and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence conduct compliance audits and report violations. Congress receives periodic briefings and inspectors general issue reports. For learners, this reflects the governance ecosystem around surveillance authorities. Oversight does not depend on one actor but is distributed across judicial, executive, and legislative institutions. While critics argue that secrecy weakens accountability, the layered structure shows how the U.S. system embeds checks to prevent abuse, even in highly classified contexts where public transparency is limited. Transparency efforts, including declassified summaries and public reporting, have increased in recent years. Providers publish transparency reports disclosing ranges of 702 orders received, while the government releases annual statistical reports about targeting and querying. For learners, these efforts illustrate how even secret programs can accommodate limited openness. Aggregate disclosures empower public debate and judicial review without revealing operational details. Transparency is not absolute, but it acts as a democratic counterbalance, reinforcing that surveillance programs operate under law and scrutiny rather than unchecked secrecy. Data collected under Section 702 may sometimes be used in criminal prosecutions, triggering notice obligations to defendants. Litigation has challenged the constitutionality of 702 collection and its use in domestic cases, with courts weighing whether incidental capture of U.S. person data violates the Fourth Amendment. For learners, these challenges illustrate how privacy debates migrate from intelligence settings into the criminal justice system. When intelligence becomes evidence, the clash between secrecy and due process intensifies, highlighting how legal frameworks must reconcile national security with defendants, rights to confrontation and discovery. Cross-border provider footprints add further complexity. Multinational tech companies subject to 702 may simultaneously face obligations under foreign data protection laws, such as the European Union's GDPR. This creates conflicts where compliance with one law risks violation of another. For learners, this underscores the global character of privacy governance. Section 702 is not an isolated U.S. law. Its effects ripple internationally, straining diplomatic relations and fueling debates about digital sovereignty. Providers must navigate these conflicts through legal challenges, negotiated frameworks, and technical architectures that attempt to satisfy overlapping obligations. Technical segregation, selector validation, and auditability are operational imperatives in 702 acquisition systems. Providers must ensure that only approved selectors trigger collection, that data is compartmentalized, and that audit logs can demonstrate compliance. For learners, these requirements reflect the operationalization of legal promises. Minimization and targeting are not abstract concepts. They are enforced through technical controls and documented oversight. This convergence of law and engineering demonstrates how privacy and security must be embedded directly into system design, not left to after-the-fact policy checks. Vendors and subprocessors who support platforms exposed to 702 data are also subject to restrictions. Providers must ensure that third parties handling infrastructure or support functions maintain security and limit access to classified workflows. Contracts, audits, and segregation mechanisms help enforce these obligations. For learners, this highlights the recurring theme that privacy governance extends across supply chains. Even when surveillance is legally compelled, the obligation to safeguard data against misuse or overcollection does not end at the provider's perimeter. It must be carried through to every actor with potential exposure. Governance posture for Section 702 compliance requires balancing legal obligations, privacy risk, and operational security. Providers must maintain structures that integrate legal review, technical safeguards, and senior oversight. Errors must be logged, reported, and remediated quickly, demonstrating accountability to both regulators and users. For learners, this posture reflects the maturity of privacy management in national security contexts. Section 702 compliance is not about passively following orders. It is about actively governing the process to ensure legality, proportionality, and integrity. This disciplined approach allows providers to uphold their obligations under law while preserving trust in the broader digital ecosystem. In conclusion, FISA and Section 702 illustrate the layered balance between national security and privacy. Traditional FISA emphasizes individualized orders, probable cause, and judicial review, while Section 702 embodies programmatic collection of foreign intelligence with safeguards to minimize incidental U.S. person impact. For learners, the synthesis is clear. These frameworks rely on targeted acquisition, minimization, oversight, and disciplined provider handling to preserve both operational security and fundamental rights. National security surveillance may be secretive, but it is not lawless. It is bound by complex structures of governance designed to balance intelligence needs with privacy protections in a world of global digital communication. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.